What's going on, guys? Today I wanted to make a little video talking about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is coilovers. So this is probably going to be a multi-video series. I'm actually getting ready to rebuild these Broadway Static coilovers. I'm going to be upgrading a few of the parts on it, so I'm going to be showing all you guys that. And then I got my buddy's BC Extreme Lows over here, so we're just going to kind of compare the two, and hopefully this video will help you make your coilover selection and avoid some of the common mistakes that happens when it comes to buying coilovers for your car. And just to reiterate, this is going to be strictly from a stance/riding low aspect. So this is all going to be for making your car as low as possible and the things to consider, vice going over the pros and cons of a performance coilover. Taking off the rear coilovers is a relatively straightforward and easy process. I just wanted to take this time to show you guys how to properly take off the front coilover, because this is where the most mistakes happen, and these are going to help you out, especially if you're working on your car alone because you have no friends. So the most common mistake when taking off the front coilovers is they'll actually drop this entire coilover assembly right onto the axle boot right there, and when you do that you have potential of ripping or damaging the axle boot, and when that happens it's just going to be a huge mess of grease. Every time you drive the car, the axle is going to spin and sling grease everywhere, and once you lose all that grease packing that's inside that boot, that axle is going to fail sooner rather than later. And if you plan on taking your coilover off to adjust it, this would be the best time to break these collars loose while this entire assembly is on the car. What you can do is actually lock the steering wheel in place, so when you apply torque to these collars to break them loose, the coilover is not going to spin, and then you can just go to town with your spanner wrench. So before we do anything else, we're going to remove this brake line here. We're going to remove the ABS sensor. We're going to remove the nuts for these bolts. And I like to keep one bolt in to hold the suspension assembly up before the next step. Alright, so we removed our brake line. I like to put the bolt back in the bracket just so we don't lose it later. We got one bolt taken out here, one bolt holding the entire suspension assembly up, and the ABS sensor is removed. Now what I like to do is stick a jack underneath and apply some pressure underneath the lower control arm, so that when we go to take out these strut tower nuts, this entire suspension assembly is not going to drop. Alright, we got our jack putting some pressure on the lower control arm there. Now we can go ahead and take these nuts completely off, and we don't have to worry about this suspension assembly dropping until we lower the jack. Now we have our nuts removed, so we can go ahead and lower this jack and support the coilover while we're doing so. Take out that final bolt, and then we'll have the coilover out. Now we have our coilovers side by side. We got Broadway Static Super Low on the left, BC Extreme Low on the right. Those are the rears, and then we got the same going here for the front. Obviously some of the springs and components are taken off the coilovers right now, but we can ignore that for now. So if you ask me, Alex, which coilovers should I get to make sure I can get my car low enough, make sure I can make it slammed, whatever you're trying to do, these are the two coilovers I always recommend. So BC is the cheaper option of the two. Unfortunately, these are kind of mass produced. They use more components from Taiwan and China, but Broadway Static is actually a sister company of Fortune Auto, and these are all US made parts, US assembled. You also have a few things from Japan in there as well, like the radial bearings, but this is going to be an all-around better quality coilover. It's obviously going to be more expensive, and the real technology and everything that you're paying for is actually all internal to the strut itself. And just for a size comparison, the rears on the BCs are maybe like an inch shorter than the Broadways, but the fronts are virtually the exact same length. Alright, so now we figured out that we want the low versions of these coilovers, right? We don't want the regular BCBRs. We don't want the regular Broadway Statics, because those are just going to be longer strut bodies, and those are not going to be able to let you go as low as you want to go. So we come over to our chart here, and we have the Broadway Static Super Lows, which usually go for around $1,800 with a premium spring upgrade, which is going to include a brand like Swift. And then you have the BC Racing Extreme Lows for $1,300, but you're going to have to request for this specific spring length. you're gonna want 5-inch springs in order to go low enough. And this is just a note up here to remind you that Broadway and Fortune Auto are sister companies. And the reason you want 5-inch springs is so that you can thread these lower mounts up and use their maximum potential in order to go low. So if you have a 6 or 7-inch spring, something super long sitting on the top of here, what's going to happen is you're going to thread this lower mount up to go lower. You're going to run into the spring and the car is still not going to be low enough. Same thing goes for these. Now the strut can't pass through the bottom of these mounts. This is more of a cup mount, so once it bottoms out in the cup, you can't go any lower. But if the spring is too long, you won't even be able to go to the bottom of this cup before you run into the spring. Now the last thing I wanted to say before I finish up this video is you can actually get something that I like to nickname the Super Duper Low, which is actually GT86 chassis struts with 4-inch springs. So these coilovers are even shorter than these, and these allow you to go super low with your car, and that's going to be good for the guys that want to be slammed but don't want to run a lot of camber. So that's the kind of setup that you're going to want to go for. Just a disclaimer, these probably won't go low enough with the stock LCA. You're going to want to utilize a drop LCA or something with these, unless you're running a lot of camber. And in order to go lower, there are a few different methods, so I'm going to go over that in future videos. So basically, if you want these super duper low struts, all you have to do is specify that you want an 86 strut body, but you want to utilize the top hats and the lower mounts in the front for the VA chassis, because those cars are in fact slightly different when it comes to the dimensions on the mounts and the top hats. So that is the basics of spring length. I just wanted to remind you that you should always upgrade to a premium spring such as Swift. These springs are going to last a lot longer. They're made of a more superior material. Obviously, they're going to be a little bit more expensive, but for springs, you should never skimp out on quality.